Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Nova Chronicles. Somewhere in Amboseli, Kenya, a 60-year-old elephant is leading her family toward water she has not visited in 11 years. She has not seen a map. She has not followed a scent trail or a visible landmark. The landscape has changed since her last visit, the trees that marked the route now gone, the seasonal stream she remembers from a drought year now dry. She is navigating by something that does not have a name in any human language that predates the science of animal cognition, a spatial memory so precise, so deep, so biologically embedded in the architecture of her brain that it preserves the location of a waterhole she found during the worst drought of her adult life and has not needed since. She knows where the water is. She was there before. And she is taking her family there now, 17 individuals, for generations. The youngest a calf born 3 months ago who has never been further than 10 kilometers from the place it entered the world, across a landscape of dried grass and cracked earth and the specific, heavy silence of a savanna in the grip of a drought that has been building for 8 months and that has driven every other water source within range of the family's territory to nothing. The calf is struggling. The matriarch, the 60-year-old female who carries in her memory the geographical archive of 40 years of survival on this landscape, moves slower than she would if she were alone. She adjusts her pace to the pace of the smallest member of her group. She does not leave the calf behind. This is not sentiment. It is the operational logic of a social structure that has maintained itself for 60 million years of proboscidea and evolution. The logic that says, the group's survival depends on the survival of its members, and the members most vulnerable to loss are the ones most worth protecting, because the loss of any member diminishes the group's collective knowledge and therefore its collective survival capacity. The matriarch is not being kind. She is being intelligent, in the most fundamental, evolutionary, long-term sense of the word. And this is the first misconception to release tonight. Gently, the way you would release a long-held breath. The misconception that what looks like kindness in the elephant is merely instinct. That the behaviors we observe, the care of the young, the support of the injured, the return to the bones of the dead, are mechanical responses to environmental triggers that produce outcomes resembling emotion without the substrate of emotion. The science says otherwise. And the science has been accumulating for 50 years. The elephant has the largest brain of any land animal on Earth, absolutely, weighing approximately 5 kilograms, roughly 4 times the weight of a human brain. And the elephant's brain contains, in proportions and absolute sizes that are, among land animals, matched only by the great apes and by humans, the neural structures associated with complex social cognition, emotional processing, and the specific forms of memory that long-term social life requires. The temporal lobe, the region of the brain associated in mammals with long-term memory and social recognition, is, in the elephant, disproportionately large even relative to the brain's overall size. The hippocampus, the navigator structure, the spatial memory system, the archive of places and routes and the ecological knowledge accumulated over a lifetime, is, in the elephant, larger relative to brain size than in almost any other land animal. The elephant's brain was built for memory. Long-term, detailed, emotionally encoded memory of the specific individuals and the specific places and the specific events that constitute a lifetime spent in a social group, navigating a demanding, seasonal, drought-prone landscape, where the difference between knowing where the water is and not knowing can be the difference between the calves living and dying. The elephant remembers because remembering saves lives. Not its own life, necessarily. The matriarch who leads her family to the water she found 11 years ago during a drought may not be the one who benefits most directly. The calves will benefit. The juveniles will benefit. The young females who will one day be matriarchs themselves and who are, right now, following the 60-year-old through the dried grass, learning the route, encoding it in their own hippocampi, building the geographical archive that they will one day use to lead their own families. They will benefit. The matriarch is teaching, without being aware that she is teaching, simply by doing what she has always done, navigating the landscape she has spent 60 years learning, moving with the certainty of an animal whose memory holds the map of a territory the size of a small country. You carry a version of this in your own biology. Your hippocampus, the same brain structure that holds the elephant's geographical and social archive, stores, in its place cells and its grid cells and the specific neural representations of every environment you have spent significant time navigating, the accumulated spatial knowledge of your own life. The route from your childhood home to the school you walk to. The layout of every building you have lived in. The geography of the places that shaped you, held not as explicit memories that require conscious retrieval, but as the deep, embodied, navigationally available knowledge that allows you to orient in familiar spaces without effort, to feel disoriented in unfamiliar ones, to know, in the specific, proprioceptive, whole-body way that real spatial knowledge produces, where you are in relation to where you have been. The elephant's hippocampus and your hippocampus are solving the same problem, with different scales, different landscapes, different social structures, but the same evolutionary logic. The long-term storage of spatial and social information in a form that can be accessed quickly, accurately, and under conditions of stress, when the need for that information is most acute. The matriarch found the water. Tonight we are going to follow the elephant, from the mechanics of its extraordinary brain and the social architecture of the herd, through the communication system that carries infrasound across 20 kilometers of savanna, through the specific behaviors that have made elephant cognition one of the most intensively studied subjects in animal science, to the place where all of it arrives in you. In the hippocampus, you share with the matriarch. In the social bonds, your nervous system values the way the elephant values its herd. In the specific, ancient, deep-brained comfort of being in the company of those you know and trust, at the end of a long day, in the warmth and the dark. If this gentle journey into the life of the world's most cognitively sophisticated land animal is useful to you tonight, a slow hour of elephant memory and social intelligence and the patient, ancient, matriarch-led logic of a species that has been navigating this planet for 60 million years, then I would gently invite you to subscribe, or to leave a thought below about which part of this stays with you. It helps other people who are lying in their own warm dark, also members of their own particular herd, also reaching the end of a long day of navigation, find their way here, one footstep at a time. But for now, there is only this. Allow your shoulders to soften. Let your breathing slow, not forced into any particular rhythm, just allowed to find the pace it finds when the body has arrived somewhere safe, and the navigation is done for the day, and the herd is together, and the water was found, and the calves are resting, and there is nothing more that the long day required. The matriarch is lying down. The herd is around her. The landscape is quiet. Let's begin. The elephant's brain is the most socially complex organ that evolution has ever built into a land animal. This is not a casual claim. It is the specific, peer-reviewed conclusion of 50 years of research into the cognitive and neurological architecture of the largest terrestrial mammal alive. Research that has, through the accumulation of field observations and experimental tests and neuroanatomical studies and genetic analyses, assembled a picture of elephant cognition that is, in its depth and its complexity and its specific resemblance to human social intelligence, genuinely unlike anything documented in any other non-primate land animal. The elephant passes the mirror test. The mirror test, the standard experimental measure of self-recognition in animals, first developed by psychologist Gordon Gallup Jr. in 1970, involves placing a mark on an animal's body and presenting the animal with a mirror. An animal that recognizes the reflection as itself will touch or investigate the mark. An animal that does not will either ignore the reflection or treat it as another individual. Before the elephant study published in 2006, only chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and dolphins had demonstrated mirror self-recognition. The elephant, tested with a mirror 2.5 meters tall, large enough to show the elephant its full body, touched the mark on its own forehead. It recognized itself. What this means at the level of neuroscience is that the elephant possesses a neural representation of its own body that is stable enough, detailed enough, and sufficiently distinct from its representations of other elephants to allow it to identify the mismatch between the expected appearance of its own body and the altered appearance produced by the mark. It has a self-model, a persistent, accurate, updatable representation of what it itself looks like, distinct from the representations of every other individual it has ever encountered. The elephant knows what it looks like. And this capacity, the capacity for self-representation, for maintaining a model of the self that is distinct from the model of the social world, is not a party trick. It is the cognitive foundation of the specific social intelligence that makes elephant society function. An animal that cannot distinguish itself from others cannot track the reciprocal obligations of a long-term social relationship, cannot remember that it was helped and that helping back is appropriate, cannot feel the specific emotions, guilt, gratitude, grief, that require a self that persists over time and that carries the memory of past interactions with a weight that influences future behavior. The elephant can feel guilty. This is not anthropomorphism. It is the specific inference that the neuroanatomy makes unavoidable. The inference that a brain containing the neural structures for self-representation and long-term social memory and the limbic processing of emotional experience is a brain capable of the specific emotional states that those structures support, regardless of whether the animal can communicate those states in a form that human observers can verify directly. Detectives looking at the neuroanatomy of the elephant brain using MRI and histological analysis revealed something that recalibrated the understanding of where, in the history of mammalian evolution, the specific neural architecture of complex social cognition first appeared. The elephant's limbic system, the set of brain structures associated with emotional processing and social bonding and the formation of long-term emotional memories, contains, in large and well-developed form, every structure that the human limbic system contains. The amygdala, the hippocampus, the cingulate cortex, the insula, all of them large, all of them richly connected, all of them embedded in a brain that is, in the proportion of its neural resources devoted to social and emotional processing relative to its total brain volume, more similar to the human brain than to the brains of any other land animal. The elephant and the human are not closely related by the standards of mammalian phylogenetics. Their last common ancestor lived approximately 60 million years ago, before the great diversification of the placental mammals that produced the separate lineages leading to elephants, primates, rodents, carnivores, and every other major group of modern mammals. 60 million years of separate evolution, separate lineages, separate pressures. And yet the brain architecture converged. Because the problem they were both solving, the problem of living in large, complex, long-term social groups in which individual relationships are tracked over decades and reciprocal obligations are maintained across lifetimes, and the collective knowledge of the group is the primary survival asset, is the same problem. And the solution to that problem, built independently by two separate lineages over 60 million years of separate evolutionary history, is the same solution: a large, richly connected, emotionally embedded social brain. The monster of elephant cognition is not the 5-kilogram brain itself, not the raw mass, not the sheer quantity of neural tissue. The monster is the function that the specific architecture of that tissue supports. The capacity to maintain, over a lifetime of up to 70 years, a social network of dozens of known individuals whose relationships to each other and to the remembering elephant are continuously tracked, updated, and integrated into the decision-making that determines who to approach, who to avoid, who to help, and who to trust. The elephant knows every individual in its extended social network. By name, not name in the linguistic sense, but in the acoustic sense. Every elephant produces a specific, individually distinctive contact call, a low rumble in the infrasound range that is the elephant's equivalent of a name. Detectives looking at the acoustic structure of elephant contact calls using spectrographic analysis revealed that each individual's contact call has a unique acoustic signature, a specific pattern of fundamental frequency and overtone structure and temporal modulation that identifies the caller as specifically as a human voice identifies a human speaker. The elephant knows the voices of its family members, can recognize them at distances of up to 2 kilometers, can respond appropriately to the contact call of a specific individual, moving toward a family member's call, freezing in response to an unfamiliar call, displaying the specific behavioral and physiological responses associated with social recognition when it hears the call of an individual it knows well. An elephant that hears the contact call of a family member it has not encountered for years responds with a specific, whole-body, vocalization-producing behavior that observers describe consistently as the behavior of an animal experiencing the reunion with a known and valued individual. The elephant recognizes its relatives' voices after years of separation, and responds to hearing them with something that looks, from any honest perspective, like joy. Your own voice recognition system works the same way. You can identify a family member's voice from a single syllable heard in a crowd. You can distinguish the voice of someone you love from hundreds of other voices without any conscious effort. The neural machinery for voice recognition, for the extraction of individual identity from the specific acoustic signature of a voice, is one of the most highly developed and most automatic cognitive capacities in the human brain, activating before conscious awareness, producing the specific emotional response of recognition before any deliberate identification has occurred. You and the elephant share the same social acoustics. Both of you listening for the voices you know. Both of you responding with the same ancient, limbic, whole-body recognition response when those voices arrive. Now consider the scale of the social network that the elephant's cognitive architecture maintains. African savanna elephants live in a fission-fusion society, a social structure in which the core family group, led by the matriarch and consisting of related females and their offspring, regularly separates from and reunites with other family groups, forming temporary aggregations of dozens or hundreds of individuals around high-quality resources, water, food, salt licks, and then dispersing again as the resource is consumed or the group becomes too large to manage. The elephant's social world extends far beyond the family group. Individual elephants in the Amboseli Elephant Research Project, the longest-running elephant field study in the world, begun in 1972 and still ongoing, have been documented maintaining recognitional relationships with more than 300 individual known elephants in their extended social network, not merely tolerating the presence of 300 others, maintaining specific, differentiated, relationship history-informed responses to 300 specific individuals, knowing which are allies and which are rivals, which are kin and which are unrelated, which responded helpfully in a past interaction and which did not. 300 known individuals. Your own social network, the number of people you can maintain stable social relationships with, the number whose relationship history with you influences your current responses to them, is limited, according to the research of evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar, to approximately 150 individuals. The Dunbar number, the specific limit on human social network size that the neocortex of the primate brain supports. The elephant's social network is twice the size of yours. In a brain that evolved for the same fundamental purpose, the management of a complex, long-term, reciprocally obligated social world in which the collective knowledge and the collective resources of the group are the primary survival assets, but that has been under evolutionary pressure to scale that capacity to the specific demands of elephant social life, which spans larger territories, longer lifespans, and larger extended family networks than primate social life typically requires. The elephant has a bigger social brain than you. For good reason. It needs to. A matriarch's territory in the Amboseli ecosystem covers approximately 2,000 square kilometers, an area roughly equal to the City of London and its surrounding metropolitan area. Within that territory, she maintains relationships with every family group she has encountered, tracks the seasonal movements of resource patches she visited decades ago, remembers the locations of every significant waterhole and salt lick and sheltered valley within range, and integrates all of this information with her continuous monitoring of the social and ecological state of her immediate family group. 2,000 square kilometers. 300 known individuals. A 50-year spatial archive. All of it processed simultaneously, continuously, in the dark interior of a skull the size of a small car. The elephant is carrying the world in her head, not as a metaphor, as a biological reality, as the specific, active, continuously updated neural representation of a world that is too large and too complex and too socially intricate to navigate without the specific cognitive architecture that 60 million years of proboscis and evolution has produced. Your head is carrying your world in the same way. The specific neural representation of the people who matter to you, the places that define your territory, the memories that inform your current understanding of the social and physical landscape you navigate. All of it held in a brain that weighs 1.4 kilograms, less than a third of the elephant's 5-kilogram archive, but that is, by any comparative measure, the most densely packed, most richly connected, most computationally powerful per unit volume of any brain that biology has produced. You are carrying your world in your head. Right now. In the dark. The hippocampus replaying the day's navigation. The amygdala processing the day's social encounters. The prefrontal cortex integrating the day's decisions into the ongoing model of the social world that tomorrow's navigation will require. All of it running. In the dark behind your eyes. In the warm, heavy, patient dark of a brain that has been doing this work. The work of social cognition, of memory, of the continuous maintenance of the relationships and the knowledge and the emotional bonds that make social life possible, since before your species existed. The elephant has been doing it longer. But the architecture is the same. The work is the same. And tonight, as your brain begins the specific transition from the high-frequency, high-amplitude electrical activity of waking social cognition to the slower, deeper, restorative rhythms of sleep, it is doing what the matriarch does when the herd settles for the night, completing the day's navigation, reviewing the social information gathered, consolidating the experience into the long-term archive, preparing the mind for tomorrow's territory. An elephant digs a well, not with tools, with its feet and its tusks and the enormous, muscular, extraordinarily dexterous structure at the end of its trunk, the trunk's tip, which contains approximately 40,000 individual muscle fascicles in the African elephant and approximately 100,000 in the Asian, a density of muscular control that gives it a manipulative precision comparable to a human hand. The elephant drives its tusks into a dry riverbed. It scrapes the loosened material away with its feet. It scoops the deeper layers with the trunk's tip, working in the pre-dawn dark, in the specific, focused, slow rhythm of an animal that has done this before and knows exactly what it is looking for. 2 hours later, clean water is seeping into a hole approximately a meter deep in what was, until this morning, a dry sandy riverbed. The elephant drinks, then steps back, and waits, not because it is generous in any conscious sense. Because the social logic of a species that lives in a world where water is scarce and the knowledge of how to find it is the most valuable cognitive asset the group possesses has produced, over millions of years of selection, a social tolerance around the water source that serves the long-term survival of the community. Other animals approach the well that the elephant has dug. Other elephants, zebras, oryx, the species that cannot dig, but that follow the elephants precisely because the elephants know where the water is and how to reach it. The elephant is a keystone species, more completely than almost any other large animal on the planet. The direct ecological impact of a single elephant, moving through a landscape over the course of a lifetime, digging wells in dry riverbeds, creating waterholes where none existed, pushing over trees that block the growth of the shrubs and grasses that smaller herbivores depend on, spreading seeds in their dung across distances that no wind or smaller animal could manage, compacting soil along their trails into the firm pathways that become the game trails that every other animal in the ecosystem uses, is the impact of a geological force operating on an ecological timescale. The elephant does not live in the landscape. It builds the landscape. Detectives looking at the long-term ecological effects of elephant populations on African savanna ecosystems using satellite imagery and vegetation surveys conducted over periods of decades revealed something that reframes the entire relationship between the elephant and the landscape it inhabits. The specific vegetation structure of the African savanna, the particular mosaic of open grassland and woodland and shrubland that defines the ecosystem and determines its biodiversity, is not simply a product of climate and rainfall and soil. It is, in significant part, a product of elephant activity. Where elephant populations are dense, the vegetation is more open, trees are more widely spaced, the canopy is more broken, more light reaches the ground, more grasses and low shrubs grow in the spaces the trees do not fill. Where elephant populations have been reduced or eliminated, the vegetation closes up, the woodland thickens, the canopy closes, the grass diminishes, the specific structural complexity that the open savanna provides is lost. The elephant is the savanna's architect, not incidentally, not as a side effect of its feeding behavior, as the primary force that maintains the specific structural character of one of the Earth's most biodiverse ecosystems. The elephant's dung is a forest in waiting. This is not a metaphor. An African elephant consumes approximately 180 kilograms of plant material per day and passes approximately 120 to 150 kilograms of dung, roughly the weight of 2 average-sized adult humans, in the same period. Each deposit contains the undigested seeds of dozens of plant species, many of them processed through the elephant's digestive system in ways that actually improve germination rates by scarifying the seed coat and removing the germination inhibitors that the fruit pulp contains. The elephant eats a fruit and defecates the seed in a new location, sometimes tens of kilometers from the parent plant, wrapped in a bolus of nutrient-rich dung that provides the germinating seedling with the initial nutritional boost it needs to establish itself in a location where, without the elephant, it would never have arrived. Detectives looking at the seed dispersal ranges of the plant species that elephants consume in the forests of Central Africa revealed that approximately 30% of the tree species in some African forest ecosystems are dependent on elephants for their primary seed dispersal mechanism. Dependent, not in the sense of preferring elephant dispersal, not in the sense of being more successful when elephants disperse their seeds. Dependent in the strict ecological sense of being unable to recruit new individuals beyond the shadow of the parent tree without the elephant's gut passage and long-distance transport. Remove the elephant, and 30% of the forest species cannot reproduce effectively. The forest does not immediately collapse. The existing trees live on. But the next generation, the seedlings that would eventually replace the trees that fall to disease and storm and old age, cannot establish themselves in the locations where the forest needs them. The forest ages. It does not renew. And across decades and centuries, the composition of the forest shifts toward the species that do not depend on elephant dispersal and away from the species that do. The landscape loses the trees that the elephant planted. Your body depends on a similar dispersal mechanism, the specific process by which genetic information is carried from one generation to the next, modified by the journey, arriving in a new context that the previous generation never inhabited. Your DNA carries the accumulated dispersal history of a lineage that has been moving across landscapes for 6 million years, adapting to new environments, incorporating the genetic innovations that new combinations of parental genomes produce, building the specific biological architecture that your specific moment and place and social context required. You are a seed that the lineage dispersed, as the forest tree is a seed that the elephant dispersed. Both of you carrying the genetic material of the organism that produced you. Both of you establishing in a location that the dispersal mechanism, evolution in your case, the elephant's gut in the trees, carried you to. Both of you dependent on the journey that preceded your arrival. The elephant's trail system is itself an ecological contribution that no single visit to the landscape can fully account for. The trails that elephants create, the specific pathways that the repeated passage of heavy-footed, consistent route-following animals over decades and centuries beats into firm, wide, navigable corridors through vegetation that would otherwise be dense and difficult, become the infrastructure of the entire ecosystem. Every other animal that moves through the landscape uses the elephant's trails. Every hyena, every lion, every gazelle, every human hunter and herder and traveler who has crossed the African landscape for the last 2 million years has, at some point, walked a path that the elephant made. The elephant's knowledge of the landscape, stored in the matriarch's hippocampus, expressed in the routes she chooses, transmitted to the younger females who follow her, becomes, through the physical trace of repeated movement, the landscape's own spatial organization. The elephant thinks the trail into existence. The trail outlasts the elephant, and the next generation uses the trail without knowing who made it. This is cultural transmission without language. Knowledge preserved not in words or symbols or any explicit medium of communication, but in the physical modification of the environment, in the pressed-down grass and the worn smooth rock and the compacted soil of a path that was established by a matriarch who died before the animals currently using it were born, and that will be used by animals not yet born after every current user is gone. The elephant's knowledge of the landscape is literally written into the landscape, and read back by every subsequent generation that walks the same paths. Your own knowledge is written into your environment in the same way, in the specific organization of your living space, the arrangement of the things you use and the places you put them, the routes you take through your daily geography, the spatial habits that embody your accumulated experience of how to navigate your world efficiently. Future inhabitants of your space will find a landscape shaped by your decisions, your trails pressed into the carpet, your paths worn into the garden, your organizational logic embedded in the shelves and the drawers and the spatial logic of a space that carries the record of how you lived in it. You are writing your knowledge into your landscape, as the elephant writes its knowledge into the savanna, both of you creating the infrastructure that others will use. Without knowing that is what you are doing. Now follow the elephant to the waterhole at dusk, the specific, daily, social gathering that constitutes the most consistently documented and most consistently moving aspect of elephant behavior in the long-term field research. The approach. Elephants traveling to a waterhole do not arrive in silence. They arrive in conversation. The infrasound rumbles that pass between family members as they approach the water, the contact calls, the greeting rumbles, the specific, low-frequency vocalizations that carry more information in their modulation and their context than any brief description can convey, build in intensity as the family nears the water, as the anticipation of the resource and the social density of the gathering produces in the elephants a specific, observable, physiologically measurable state of arousal that is not fear and is not hunger, but is the specific emotional condition of an animal approaching something it values deeply. The family arrives at the water, and the greeting begins. Family groups that have been separated for hours or days, groups that were foraging in different parts of the territory, following different vegetation patches, moving in the separate units that the fission fusion social structure allows, converge at the waterhole and engage in the specific, elaborate, full-body greeting ceremony that elephant researchers call a greeting ceremony for the simple reason that it is exactly that. The elephants approach each other. They touch. They intertwine trunks. They rumble. They spin and back into each other. They produce a specific, intense, temporally coordinated burst of vocalization. The greeting rumble, a low, rolling, infrasound-rich call produced simultaneously by multiple individuals and directed at the approaching group, that is as unambiguous in its social function as any greeting ritual in any human culture. They are happy to see each other. This is not a sentimental interpretation. It is the specific, neurologically grounded, hormonally measurable conclusion that arises from the observation that greeting ceremonies between elephant family groups produce measurable elevations in oxytocin, the neuropeptide associated in mammals with social bonding and the positive emotional experience of connection, in the blood of the participating animals. The elephant's chemistry of reunion is the same chemistry as yours. Oxytocin, produced by the hypothalamus, released into the bloodstream and the brain by social contact, by touch, by contact, by the proximity of known and trusted individuals. The elephant at the waterhole greeting a family member it has not seen for 3 days is experiencing a neurochemical event that is, in its molecular mechanism and its emotional quality, identical to the neurochemical event you experience when you are reunited with someone you love after a period of separation. The same molecule, the same receptor, the same ancient social mammal feeling of the group being complete again. Your body is doing a version of this right now. not the intense, elevated, reunion greeting version. The baseline version, the low-level oxytocin activity that social proximity to trusted individuals maintains continuously, that is elevated in the presence of people who matter to you and reduced in isolation, that constitutes the neurochemical substrate of the specific, quiet, hard-to-name feeling of being somewhere you belong. The feeling you are looking for when the day is over, and the social demands are done, and the body wants nothing more than to be in the company of its people. The elephant knows this feeling, has always known it. In the warm, noisy, trunk-touching, infrasound rumbling density of the waterhole gathering, as the light drops and the day ends and the families that have been separated across the landscape come back together in the one place the landscape reliably provides. The water, the family, the reunion, the ancient, oxytocin-soaked, social mammal satisfaction of the group together at the end of the day. It is the same feeling, wherever the mammal is lying down to rest. Between 1979 and 1989, approximately half of all African elephants were killed, not in a single event, not as the result of a natural catastrophe or a disease or a climatic shift. Through the ivory trade, the systematic commercial hunting of elephants for their tusks, driven by demand in Asian markets where carved ivory carried cultural and economic value, and facilitated by the collapse of legal protection that followed the political and economic instability of much of sub-Saharan Africa in the 1970s and 1980s. Half, in a single decade, from approximately 1.3 million African elephants in 1979 to approximately 600,000 in 1989, a loss of approximately 700,000 individuals from the population of the largest land animal on Earth, achieved in 10 years through the specific, targeted, systematic killing of the individuals with the largest tusks. The individuals with the largest tusks were, overwhelmingly, the oldest, the matriarchs, the oldest females, the individuals who carried in their hippocampi the deepest spatial archives, the longest social memories, the most detailed ecological knowledge of the landscapes they had been navigating for 50 or 60 years, were disproportionately targeted by the ivory hunters. Their tusks were the largest. Their tusks had been growing for the longest. And their death, the death of the individual who carried the group's primary cognitive asset, the individual whose memory of where the water was during the last catastrophic drought was the family's survival strategy for the next one, was not only the death of an animal. It was the destruction of a library, the specific, irreplaceable, biologically encoded library of ecological and social knowledge that the matriarch's brain contained, the archive of 50 years of navigation, 50 years of drought responses, 50 years of social relationships and their histories, 50 years of the specific geographical and ecological intelligence that kept calves alive during the lean seasons, was gone, and it could not be rebuilt. The younger females who survived, the daughters and granddaughters who had been following the matriarch, learning her routes, encoding her knowledge into their own hippocampi, had been learning, but they had not finished learning. The full archive that a 70-year-old matriarch carries in her memory requires 70 years of lived experience in the landscape to build. A 20-year-old female who loses her matriarch at 20 has 40 years of knowledge that she will never possess, because the animal who would have transmitted it to her is dead. The poaching crisis of the 1980s did not simply reduce the elephant population. It severed the intergenerational transmission of ecological knowledge across the entire African elephant population. Detectives looking at the behavioral consequences of the 1980s poaching crisis in elephant populations that experienced high matriarch loss revealed effects that were still measurable decades after the killing had stopped. Elephant families that had lost their matriarchs to poaching in the 1980s showed, in studies conducted in the 1990s and 2000s, significantly different social behavior from families that had retained experienced matriarchs. The matriarch-poor families were less socially cohesive. They made poorer decisions about when to flee from perceived threats, responding inappropriately either by fleeing from non-threatening stimuli or by failing to respond adequately to genuine threats. They had lost their social and ecological compass. The specific decision-making capacity that the matriarch's experience provided, The ability to distinguish a genuine threat from a false alarm, to know when the water at the familiar waterhole was contaminated and to find the alternative, to remember that the group of approaching humans carrying tourist cameras was harmless while the group carrying rifles was not, was absent in the matriarch-poor families. And without it, they were less efficient foragers, less effective at finding water during drought, less successful at avoiding human-elephant conflict, less capable of the specific, nuanced, context-appropriate responses to the demands of a landscape that had become, in the decades since the poaching crisis, simultaneously more dangerous and more crowded as the human population of Africa expanded and the elephant's territory shrank. The monster of the ivory trade is not the killing. It is the function that the killing destroyed, the specific cognitive and social function of the matriarch, the irreplaceable role of the most experienced individual in the group, the long-term consequence of killing the oldest and largest in a species whose survival depends on the intergenerational transmission of hard-won ecological knowledge. Remove the matriarch, and the herd loses its memory. This is not a metaphor for human grief, though it resonates as one. It is a direct, measurable, field-documented ecological consequence of the removal of the animal that carries the cognitive architecture on which the group's collective survival capacity is built. But the catastrophe of the ivory trade had a second face, one that is less frequently told and that requires a different kind of attention. The elephants that survived the poaching crisis were not simply the ones that were lucky enough to avoid the hunters. They were the ones that were most afraid of humans. The elephant's response to the specific predation pressure of commercial ivory poaching, a threat qualitatively different from any threat the species had faced in its evolutionary history, because it specifically targeted the largest and most experienced individuals rather than the young and the weak, because it used firearms that could kill at distances beyond the elephant's ability to detect and respond to, and because it was concentrated in areas accessible to hunters rather than distributed across the landscape, was to shift the entire species' baseline response to human presence from curiosity and tolerance to fear and avoidance. Elephant populations that experienced heavy poaching developed heritable, or at least culturally transmitted, human avoidance responses that persisted for decades after the hunting pressure was reduced. Elephants that had survived the 1980s were, in the 1990s and 2000s, significantly more likely to flee from the sound of human voices, to avoid areas with high human activity, to respond aggressively to human approach, than elephants in populations that had not experienced the same level of poaching. The trauma was transmitted to the next generation, not through genetics. There was no time for genetic selection. Through the same mechanism that transmits all elephant knowledge, the young following the old, encoding the responses of the experienced as the appropriate responses to the world. The calves born after the poaching crisis grew up in herds where every adult response to human presence was fear. They learned to be afraid, not because they had directly experienced the threat, but because the animals they trusted, the animals whose responses to the world were their primary source of information about what the world required, were afraid. The fear became the baseline, and the baseline, transmitted across generations of calves watching their mothers and aunts and the surviving older females of the herd, became the cultural inheritance of the post-poaching elephant. This is how trauma propagates through a social species, not through the direct transmission of a memory of the traumatic event, through the indirect transmission of the behavioral and emotional responses that the event produced in those who experienced it. Responses that the next generation learns as the appropriate way to be in the world, because the next generation has no other template. Your own emotional baseline, the specific level of social trust and threat vigilance, and the particular calibration of your nervous system's response to ambiguous stimuli, was shaped by the same mechanism. Not necessarily by trauma, by the specific emotional environment of the people you grew up watching. The baseline fear or the baseline safety of your earliest social environment was transmitted to you not as an explicit message, but as a pattern of behavior. The specific way the people who cared for you responded to the world, encoded by your developing nervous system as the appropriate response, the normal level of alertness, the correct degree of trust. You learned to feel the way your herd felt. as the post-poaching calf learned to be afraid of humans because its herd was afraid. But here is where the catastrophe turns, because the elephant is not only the most dramatic example of trauma transmitted through social learning, it is also the most dramatic example of trust restored through the same mechanism. The ivory trade was banned internationally in 1989 by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. The ban did not immediately stop poaching. Illegal killing continued in some regions, and a second poaching crisis in the 2000s would again devastate some populations. But in the protected areas where the ban was enforced, where the direct killing pressure dropped dramatically after 1989, the elephant populations began, slowly, to recover. And the behavioral recovery, the gradual renormalization of the elephant's response to human presence, the slow rebuilding of the tolerance that the poaching crisis had destroyed, followed the same generational mechanism as the transmission of the fear. The calves born into protected areas after 1989, in populations where the direct experience of being hunted was no longer the dominant social context, grew up watching adults who were, slowly, becoming less afraid. Not unafraid. Not instantly restored to the curiosity and tolerance that pre-poaching generations had displayed, but less reactive, less immediately fleeing, less likely to respond to a tourist vehicle with the full-body alarm response of an animal that associates the sound of an engine with the sound of a rifle. The fear relaxed, generation by generation. As the pressure that had produced it was reduced, and the calves who grew up in the less afraid herds encoded a less afraid baseline as their normal, not through any deliberate therapeutic intervention or any explicit teaching by the adults around them, simply by watching the world through the lens of less frightened adults and encoding what they saw as the appropriate level of alertness. The herd healed itself by changing what it showed its children. Detectives looking at the population recovery of African elephants in the protected areas of Kenya and Tanzania and Botswana since the 1989 ivory ban documented a rate of recovery that was, by any historical standard, extraordinary. The populations in the best protected areas growing at rates of between 4 and 8% per year across the 1990s and 2000s, with corresponding recoveries in the social structure, the matriarch age distribution, and the behavioral complexity of the recovered herds. The oldest females are again the oldest they have ever been. In the Amboseli research population, which was studied continuously through the poaching crisis and has been studied continuously through the recovery, the age structure of the female population has shifted back toward the distribution that characterizes an unhunted population. More old individuals, more experienced matriarchs, more of the specific, cognitive archive-carrying, ecological knowledge-holding older females whose absence was the real cost of the 1980s killing. The libraries are being rebuilt. Not quickly. Not completely. A matriarch who died in 1985 took with her knowledge that no living elephant possesses the specific ecological archive of the landscape as it was before the changes of the late 20th century, the waterhole locations that are now dry, the routes through territories now converted to farmland, the social histories of families now extinct. That knowledge is gone, cannot be recovered, will never be recovered. But new knowledge is accumulating in the hippocampi of the oldest living females, who are now old enough, in the best protected populations, to be the genuine ecological archives that the populations they lead need. The herd is rebuilding its memory, slowly, with the patience of a species that has been doing this, rebuilding from catastrophe, reaccumulating the knowledge that catastrophe destroys, transmitting the recovered knowledge to the next generation, for 60 million years of proboscidean history. And the landscape is changing with the recovery. The trails are being used again. The dry riverbeds are being excavated for water again. The seeds are being dispersed again across the ranges of the recovered populations. The vegetation structure of the recovered ecosystems is beginning, in the areas of highest elephant density, to show the increased structural complexity that elephant activity produces. The elephant is rebuilding the landscape it builds. as the landscape rebuilds the elephant it builds, both of them restoring the other through the specific, reciprocal, mutually dependent relationship between a keystone species and the ecosystem it maintains. The catastrophe is not over. Ivory poaching continues. Habitat loss continues. Human-elephant conflict continues in the margins of expanding agricultural communities and shrinking elephant ranges. The pressures are real and are not resolved by the decades of recovery that the best protected populations have achieved. But the recovery has happened in those populations. And the recovery teaches the same lesson that every recovery in this series of journeys has taught. The system contains its own restoration capacity. If the pressure that damaged it is reduced sufficiently, and if the individuals who carry the knowledge that the damage destroyed are given enough time and enough safety to rebuild the archive, the matriarch needs time and protection, and the landscape around her to remain intact enough that the knowledge she is accumulating is knowledge that will still be useful when she transmits it to the calves who are watching her right now. That is all. Time, protection, intact landscape. The same three things that a recovering nervous system needs. There is elephant memory in your nervous system right now. Not the specific memories of a specific elephant. Not the spatial archive of the Amboseli ecosystem or the acoustic record of 300 individual elephant contact calls, but the same neural architecture, the same hippocampal place cells and the same amygdala-based emotional memory, and the same oxytocin-driven social bonding chemistry, and the same cortisol-based threat detection system, that the elephant's brain runs its social and ecological intelligence on. You and the elephant are running the same social brain. Built independently, converged by the same evolutionary pressures, serving the same fundamental biological purpose, the management of a complex, long-term, emotionally significant social world in which the relationships between specific known individuals are tracked over years and decades, in which the collective knowledge of the group is the primary survival asset, and in which the loss of the oldest and most experienced members is experienced not just as loss in the emotional sense, but as a reduction in the group's collective cognitive capacity. When you lose someone who has known you for a long time, who carries in their memory the archive of your shared history, who knows your habits and your weaknesses and your specific geography in ways that no recent acquaintance can approximate, you lose something that is not only grief in the emotional sense. You lose the specific social intelligence that their knowledge of you provided. The relationship that was, in part, a mirror, a source of information about who you are and how you navigate the world, held in the memory of another person who has been watching you navigate it for years. The grief of the elephant at the bones of its dead is the grief of an animal that understands, in the only way that understanding is possible without language, that the individual who is gone was irreplaceable. Not as an emotional bond only, as a cognitive resource, as part of the group's mind. Detectives looking at the elephant's response to the bones of dead elephants, the specific, investigative, prolonged, multisensory engagement with the skeletal remains of deceased individuals that has been documented consistently across decades of elephant field research, revealed something that is, in its combination of specificity and depth, unlike anything documented in any other non-human animal except the great apes. Elephants return to the bones of the dead. Not once. Repeatedly. They touch the bones with their trunk tips, the most sensitive region of their body, containing the highest density of touch receptors, capable of detecting surface textures at the level of individual cells. They turn the bones with their feet. They carry the tusks. They stand in silence for periods that, to human observers, feel unmistakably like what it would feel like to stand in silence in the same situation. They are not processing the bones as objects. They are processing them as individuals, as the specific, known, irreplaceable individuals whose bodies produce those bones, individuals whose contact calls are encoded in the auditory memory of the living elephants surrounding the bones, whose history with each surviving herd member is recorded in the neural networks of the social brain that the living elephant is running right now, standing in the gathering dark with its trunk on the ivory of someone who is gone. The elephant grieves its dead, not with the cultural ritual and the linguistic expression and the explicit theological framework that human grief employs. With the same biological substrate, the same limbic processing, the same cortisol and the same reduced oxytocin and the same specific alteration in the social brain's normal functioning that the absence of a significant attachment produces, that human grief employs. The neuroscience of grief is the same across the 60 million years of separate evolution that separate the elephant from you. Because grief is not a cultural construction. It is the specific neurological consequence of the disruption of an attachment bond that the social brain has been maintaining. The signal that the system produces when a node in the social network that the brain has been monitoring and valuing and directing resources toward for years suddenly disappears. The signal says, something important is missing. Do not stop looking for it yet. The elephant does not stop looking. 4 days, sometimes weeks after a death, the surviving family members return to the location where the death occurred. Check for the bones. Touch them. Stand in silence. Not because they are failing to understand that the individual is gone. Because the social brain, the same social brain architecture that you and the elephant share, takes time to update its model. Takes time to adjust the representations and the expectations and the resource allocation patterns that the long attachment produced. Takes time to reroute the social network around the missing node. Grief is the brain updating its social map. It takes as long as it takes. And it takes longer when the individual who is gone was more central to the network, more experienced, more deeply embedded in the relationships and the knowledge and the daily functioning of the group. It takes longer when the loss is of the matriarch. The herd grieves its matriarchs the longest, as the group whose oldest and most experienced member dies grieves longest and recovers most slowly, as the family whose central connective tissue, the person who knew everyone and whose knowledge of everyone was the network's primary integration point, is lost finds itself most fragmented, most disoriented, most in need of the specific time and space that grief requires. You know this feeling, not because you have lost an elephant matriarch, because you carry the social brain that recognizes the loss of centrality in a network as the specific whole system disruption that it is, the loss that is not only emotional but cognitive, not only painful but practically disorienting, because the person who is gone was not only loved but known and knowing in ways that cannot be immediately replaced. The elephant and you grieve the same loss, in the same neural systems, with the same need for time. But follow the herd now. Follow it not to the grief, but to the other end of the emotional spectrum, to the specific experience that the social brain produces when everything is as it should be. When the herd is together, when the matriarch is present, when the calves are safe and the water was found and the evening is settling over the Amboseli plain and the families that separated to forage through the heat of the day are coming together at the waterhole as the light drops. The rumbling begins before they can see each other, long before visual contact, at distances of up to several kilometers, where the infrasound rumbles that the approaching families produce travel through the ground as seismic vibrations, that the elephants detect not through their ears but through their feet. The herd begins the specific, low-frequency, whole-body communication that serves as the arrival announcement, the status update, the social news bulletin that has been building since the families separated this morning. The elephant's infrasound communication is the most extraordinary acoustic phenomenon produced by any land animal. Calls in the range of 14 to 24 Hz, below the lower limit of human hearing, which begins at approximately 20 Hz, are produced by the elephant's larynx in rumbles that are felt as much as heard at close range, a low vibration in the chest that is the specific, physical, whole-body experience of being near a very large living thing that is communicating at a frequency evolved for a landscape where the distances between individuals regularly exceed the range of any sound. The human voice can produce Detectives looking at the transmission of elephant infrasound through the ground using seismic monitoring equipment placed in elephant territories revealed that the ground-conducted component of an elephant's infrasound call travels at approximately 350 meters per second through dry African soil, slightly slower than sound through air but covering distances that airborne sound would not reach in the specific acoustic conditions of the savanna, where ambient noise and wind scatter and attenuate the signal. The call travels through the earth, and the elephant detects it through its feet, through the Pacinian corpuscles, the specific pressure-sensitive mechanoreceptors distributed through the elephant's thick foot pads that are sensitive to the specific frequency range of infrasound vibration and that allow the elephant to detect the ground-conducted component of another elephant's call from up to 32 kilometers away. 32 kilometers. The distance between the center of London and its outermost suburbs. Detected through the feet. In the dark. The elephant knows its family is coming. Before they are visible. Before they are audible to any human ear within range. Through the earth. Through the vibration of the ground that their footsteps produce and that the distant elephant's feet detect and its brain identifies as a specific known individual. This family, this matriarch, this combination of individuals whose combined ground vibration signature is as recognizable to the receiving elephant as the combined sound of familiar voices in a familiar room. Your own feet carry a version of this sensitivity, the specific, embodied, proprioceptive awareness of the ground beneath you, the sense of where you are in space, the orientation signals that the soles of your feet transmit to the cerebellum and the brainstem as you stand and move, is one of the oldest and most continuously active sensory systems in your body. It runs in the background of every waking moment, providing the continuous postural and positional information that your motor system requires to keep you upright and oriented without any conscious effort. And it is running right now, reporting to your brain the specific texture and firmness and temperature of the surface you are lying on, the specific contact pressure at every point where your body meets the bed, the specific proprioceptive landscape of a body at rest, in contact with a surface, in the dark. Your feet know where you are, as the elephant's feet know where its family is. Both of you oriented through the ground. If this journey into the life of the elephant, through the memory and the grief and the infrasound and the waterhole reunion and the landscape the elephant builds and the catastrophe that tried to destroy it and the recovery that is slowly restoring it, has been useful to you tonight, has helped the day's social navigation settle into the specific warmth of the herd at rest, then I would gently invite you to subscribe, or to leave a thought below about which part of this stayed with you longest. Whether it was the matriarch leading her family to water she found 11 years ago, or the elephant standing in silence at the bones of its dead, or the 32 kilometers of ground-conducted infrasound that tells the approaching family the herd is here and everything is well. It helps other members of other herds find their way here, other social mammals in their warm dark, also at the end of a long day of navigation, also ready to let the herd's proximity do what the herd's proximity has always done. Remind the nervous system that it is not alone. One deep rumble at a time. And if sleep is still arriving slowly, if the social brain is still running its monitoring and its maintenance at a level the night does not require, there is another journey waiting. Another ancient social species. Another deep time story of intelligence and memory, and the specific forms of care that the most cognitively sophisticated animals on Earth have evolved for each other. Told at this same unhurried pace, in this same quiet voice. It will be there when you need it. But for now, feel the weight of your body where it meets the surface beneath you. This is what the elephant feels when it finally lies down. The specific, total, gravity-obeying weight of a body that has spent the day moving and carrying and navigating, finally releasing into the ground. Not held up anymore. Not supporting itself against gravity. Fully received by the earth. You weigh less than an elephant, but gravity is the same force, and the specific, warm, heavy, complete surrender to the ground that sleep requires, the release of the muscular effort that wakefulness demands, the dropping of the postural tension that upright living requires, the full acceptance of the surface's support, is the same act for you as it is for the 6,000-kilogram matriarch who has spent 60 years walking the savannah and who is lying down tonight in the ambasili dust with her family around her and the stars overhead and the distant, low, barely audible rumble of another family's contact call traveling through the ground toward her. She hears it through her feet, even lying down, even almost asleep. The herd is coming. Somewhere in Amboseli, Kenya, a 60-year-old elephant is resting. She found the water. The calves are safe. The family is around her. She is lying in the dark, in the warm Amboseli dust, with the weight of 60 years of memory in the 5-kilogram archive of her brain, resting. The landscape is quiet. The infrasound carries across the plain. Low, warm, continuous. The sound of a world in which the herd is together, and the water was found, and the day's navigation is done, and the night is safe. You know this feeling. It is older than your species. It is running in your nervous system right now. Allow your shoulders to soften now. The way the elephant relaxes its enormous body into the ground, completely, without reservation, the full weight settling into the dust, the muscles releasing the tension of the day's long walk. Let the weight of the day settle the same way. Not dropped suddenly, released gradually, the way 60-year-old memory settles into the quiet of the night. Allow your jaw to unclench. Allow your hands to open. Allow the social brain, the ancient, 5-million-year-old, oxytocin running, grief-capable, reunion-celebrating, infrasound-hearing social brain that you and the elephant share across 60 million years of separate evolution, to do what it was built to do when the herd is together and the water was found and the darkness is safe. Rest. The herd is together. The matriarch is here. The calves are breathing. The ground is warm. And far across the plain, so low you could not hear it if you were standing beside it, the infrasound is moving through the earth, telling every elephant in range the same thing. We are here. All is well. Rest. Nothing needs navigating tonight. Nothing needs carrying. The archive is safe. Sleep well. And good night.